This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals in which Victoria Matey, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind. For more science-based tips, join Event Psychology Club at eventpsychology.gumroad.com. Also, check out Victoria's online course, Event Psychology Lab, at eventpsychology.thinkific.com, which covers key behavioral science concepts and offers research-backed solutions to your event challenges. This course is a unique opportunity to upgrade your industry skills and gain a competitive edge without adding to your already busy schedule. Now, enjoy the conversation.
Hello, I'm Victoria Matey, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. And today I'm meeting with Anne-Laure Le Cunff, neuroscientist and entrepreneur. Anne-Laure is the founder of Ness Labs, a platform to help knowledge workers achieve their goals without sacrificing their mental health. And she writes about topics such as mindful productivity, creativity, and mental health at work. Her newsletter has got more than 80,000 readers. She's also a researcher at King's College London, where she studies psychology and neuroscience. And previously, she worked at Google, first in the event management team, and then in the digital health team. And Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Victoria.
I was going to say that I've been one of those quiet followers of yours that, never comment, but I have been following you on Twitter for a few years by now, I think. And I would also check, your articles on your website. And every time I find some unconventional perspective or some new information on the topic that I was researching. And then last year, I finally commented on your tweet asking to name one word to describe the upcoming year and how I would like it to be. And that was for a chance to get a book that you would choose. And I was so thrilled that I was chosen. I was among those followers that, received your gift. And my word was fearless. And I really appreciated, the book that you give me. And it's actually here. It's Great Dangerously by Albert Camus. And it's been a great metaphor for me, and I've been thinking about this word and the book ever since then, and really appreciated the inspiration that came from it, and I'm now very glad to have this opportunity to talk to you. I wanted to start by asking about Ness Labs, and it's a community, right, and a school that you founded. So I wanted to ask you about what it is and how did it start.
Thank you. First, the story you just shared made me so happy because I really liked that little project of just asking people about a word for the new year and then going to a bookstore, picking the books and sending them all over the world. So getting to connect with someone who received one of the books is amazing. And when it comes to Ness Labs, so I think it helps to understand what Ness Labs means in the first place. So Ness is the suffix that you use to describe the state of being. So that's what you find in consciousness, awareness, mindfulness, and labs means laboratory. So for me, Ness Labs is a personal lab to explore ideas about what it means to be, to do, to make, to evolve as a human being. And I write about a bunch of different topics that have one thing in common, is that they're all about helping people make the most of their minds to achieve their goals without sacrificing their mental health. And it started when I quit my job at Google and I tried working on a startup and that didn't work out and I was completely lost. So I went back to school. I decided to go and study something I had always been fascinated about, which was the brain. And I went back to university at the ripe age at the time of 28 to study neuroscience at King's College London. And I discovered something that I thought was fascinating at the time called the generation effect, which shows that by creating your own version of something that you want to study, you're going to both understand it better and remember it better. So I thought, okay, I'm studying neuroscience. How can I put the generation effect to use? And I decided to start a newsletter. The newsletter, what I liked about it was that it was a forcing mechanism, because you have this little contract with your readers that every week you're going to send something. So even if there are weeks where you're feeling like, oh, I'm not very inspired, I'm not sure what I'm going to write about, well, too bad. It's a weekly newsletter. You have to write something. So I really liked that little contract. And so every week I would sit down and take one of the topics that I learned about the brain and the mind, and try to write an article that was very practical and applicable for people to use in their life and work. And that was the start of Ness Labs, really, this little newsletter that I started only sending to friends and former colleagues, and which now has grown way beyond this and has become this amazing community of curious minds.
That's fantastic, and I can totally relate, to what you're saying about having this contract with your readers and subscribers. Because I've got a newsletter for event professionals about the event psychology insights, and that's exactly how it is sometimes, that you need to keep going even if you don't feel like it, at that particular point, right? But you have this responsibility to share with those who are awaiting that newsletter. So how do you define mindful productivity?
So I think that's why I call this way, because the name is pretty self-explanatory, but it's mindfulness and productivity. So it is self-explanatory, but it's also a bit counterintuitive. People kind of scratch their head the first time they hear it, because it does sound a little bit antithetic, like two different things: mindfulness on one side and productivity on the other one. But when you think about it a little bit more, mindfulness and productivity have a lot in common. It's really about directing your attention towards what you want to direct your attention to. It's about really being mindful of the way you spend your energy and the way you spend your time. And when you're at your most productive, what psychologists describe as the state of flow, a lot of the characteristics of that state are very similar to the ones that you would find in a state of mindfulness. So really, for me, mindful productivity is best described as taking some of the best learnings from mindfulness and applying them to the way we work. And you can also understanding in contrast with traditional productivity, which can be quite toxic sometimes. So if you go in a bookstore and you look at books about productivity, a lot of them are, called productivity ninja and stuff like this, where it's really about being as efficient as possible and working hard and using your willpower and your motivation to be able to work longer and do more of the stuff that you want to do. Whereas mindful productivity is a lot more about, again, being mindful of your energy levels, of your emotions, and working with them instead of against them. And that's the mindfulness aspect of it. And it may feel like in the moment, you may feel like you're doing a bit less, because you're not, working for, you're not waking up at like 5 a.m. and filling your schedule and using extreme time blocking. But in the long run, and I think I'm proof of this because I've been using mindful productivity for years and I'm actually working on lots of different projects. In the long term, what mindful productivity does is that you can make progress on your goals without burning out. And so you are actually going to be more productive, more creative, more efficient in the long term without sacrificing your mental health.
This is so relevant for event professionals, because the job itself is stressful enough. But what I also find is that a lot of event professionals, well, it used to be that way. It's probably getting less popular right now, but for years it's considered to be a norm to say how crazy busy they are, even boasting about being so busy, about sleepless nights during the event, crazy shifts. And I think at some point a realization came that it shouldn't be that way. Being busy is not equal to being productive. And I think it's somehow about the illusion of productivity. And that's something that you also talked about, right? Can you tell more about it? And what is it about the human need to keep busy, to keep, saying that, I've got so many things to do? What are the tips here?
Yeah, so I don't think that being busy all the time is a fundamental human need. I think it's fairly recent because work didn't used to look like the way it does today. But today, we basically equate our self-worth with our productivity. The more productive we are, the more value we bring to the table. This is how we see it. Once you understand that fake equation that we all have in our mind, it's completely artificial. It's not real, right? But we all have that equation in our mind, then it makes sense that we're all trying to be as productive as possible, right? And we constantly compare ourselves to each other, and we compare ourselves using this productivity as the measuring stick to know what is our value, how much someone is contributing. Some of the biggest polite insults that you can use in the workplace where nobody's going to say anything if you say that is, oh, he's slacking, or she's cruising, or she's coasting. Nobody's ever going to say, oh, you can't say this about someone. You can, right? You can in the workplace say this, but it is a bit of an insult, and it's not, nobody's ever going to say, oh, that's cool. When you think about it, someone cruising is actually a pretty good thing. It means that they manage to hit their targets, they're doing their job, and then they're going home on time, maybe to their kids or to their partner, or they have time for hobbies, and they're not completely burned out, running everywhere, constantly telling people that they're so busy and drowning in work. So there is something that is quite interesting here about the stories we're telling each other and how illogical they are when you start digging a little bit. So in terms of tips, first, before I give personal tips, I want to acknowledge the fact that this is one of those issues where you do need to have a little bit of top-down change. So if you're in event management and you are in a position of leadership, you're managing a team, it is very important to lead with example. So when I was working at Google, for example, in the event management team, we had a rule to not send emails after a certain time. And it's so much easier now because you can actually schedule emails to be sent the morning after. So if for you, it is more convenient to put the kids to bed and then get back to your email inbox and maybe send emails to a few team members or suppliers, you can do this, but you schedule the email to be sent in the morning. So you're not putting your colleagues in a position where they will feel like they have to read it and maybe reply to it. Or even if they don't reply to it, they'll go to bed thinking about it. And so you're disturbing their peace and quiet just by sending the email. But this is a lot easier to do if there is leadership alignment, if your manager is saying this is a role as part of the team. So that would be my first tip, actually. If you're in a position of leadership, it starts here. Try to create an environment where it is easier for people to be productive without being busy all the time. And now for more of personal tips. The first one is just self-awareness. So just notice every time you do the thing where you tell your colleague, oh, I'm so busy. I am so busy. Just stop yourself for a second and just try to think about, are you actually really busy? Or maybe sometimes we're projecting a little bit because there's some form of team building going on here. Like just saying, oh, you're struggling, I'm struggling, we're in it together, right? Which I think is fine. Like that's okay. But if you are really busy and you've noticed that this is going on for weeks at an end, maybe there's something that needs to be fixed. And so it could be getting help from other colleagues or talking to your manager, or maybe if your budget allows, getting another contractor that could take over some parts of the event so you don't have to do everything. A second one, I think, which is very important for the long-term busyness management, is making sure in your retrospective of the event that you're not only looking at the success metrics, but also how it felt to manage that event. So we tend very often to do those retrospectives and say we had that many attendees, this is the satisfaction rate that we got, and we were a little bit over budget for this, and maybe we had a speaker cancellation, etc. Okay, fine. And we may sometimes look at processes and try to improve them, but very rarely we debrief about how it felt, our levels of stress, how busy it was. Maybe you had to cancel drinks with a friend in order to be there to manage something last minute. All of these things that impacted your personal life. And this is so important, whether you work on your own as a freelancer doing events or as part of a team, to just sit down. And when you do your retrospective, ask yourself, how did it feel? And are there ways I was feeling in terms of emotions, in terms of stress and anxiety that I don't want to feel again in the future? What can I do to avoid feeling like that in the future?
I just love this last tip, because we start, this discussion about emotions and how the event is all about, different emotions and feelings for the audience. And thankfully, we are now having this discussion among the event community, but we haven't started talking about how the event staff, how the team members feel about the event. And I think that this is so on point that you mentioned that you need to sit down, on your own or as a team or both, ideally, right, to debrief about how it felt, how the event felt for you as a team member. I just really love it. So my next question is about the principles of mindful productivity, and you've got several, right? But I was thinking about my favorite ones, for example, and they are about breaks and environment. And I think we're just starting to recognize how important these things are in events, adding meaningful breaks to the agenda, paying attention to how event space is designed, how cluttered it is, how noisy it might be. And I think these principles, they are equally applicable to personal use and to use, in business at events. And that's why I find them highly relevant. And I wanted to ask, what are your maybe favorite or, most important principles? Maybe you can name 3 of all the principles of mindful productivity.
Yes. Well, actually, you mentioned a couple that are very important to me. For breaks, making them meaningful and actually restorative is very, very important. We tend quite often to take breaks, but really what we do is then we go and scroll on Instagram, and that's not restorative at all. So actually taking a break. And I know a lot of people say, take a walk or those kind of things. And those are absolutely amazing for all sorts of reasons. There's, nature is good for us. And so this is great. There's no question, but it's not really always practical. So I would really urge everyone to figure out what is a meaningful break that you can take, but that you can actually do, because you can have the best intentions in the world of doing what research says that you should be doing. But if you cannot practically go and take a walk in nature, then something else. For me, because most of the time I work from home, I love taking a little movement break, just actually getting up from my desk. And I am terrible at yoga and things like these, and even though I know they're good. So what I do is that I put a little bit of music and I just dance in my living room for a few minutes. And what I like about that is that because it's one song, it has a beginning, it has an end. I don't have to look at the time. I don't have to think about it. I can put my phone away, just close my laptop for a few minutes and just dance and move and, shake it off, get rid of any latent anxiety that I may be feeling in my stomach, especially the kind of free floating anxiety where you can't really pinpoint what it is. So getting rid of this through movement. So my first one, breaks, make them actually restorative. And lots of people have different ways. Could be like, making yourself a cup of tea and really taking the time to make it properly. For me, it's movements. Sometimes just 5 minutes of journaling can be helpful. So find your meaningful breaks and actually do it. So that would be the first one. The second one is focused, like being really focused on what you do. You spend a lot more energy when you're multitasking. And obviously, we think of multitasking as trying to do several things at the same time, several tasks at the same time. But when you have your phone next to your computer, you're actually multitasking without realizing it, because every time a notification pops off, your eyes are looking at it, or even just the presence, it's been shown, the presence of your phone, even if nothing is happening on the screen, is pulling your attention away, is making you feel distracted. And so you're basically asking your brain to work twice as hard trying to do your work while resisting that distraction that is here. So what I really recommend is that for any kind of deep work, creative work, and, especially for event management in the phases where you're thinking design, strategy, the things where it's like the deep thinking where you want to be really focused, put your phone in another room. It's simple as that. Put it in another room. Or if you're in an office, put it in a drawer, close the drawer, out of sight, out of mind. So that would be my second most important one. And it's so simple, but the impact it has on your ability to stay focused on your work is absolutely amazing. And third one, which you mentioned earlier, but I agree is very important, is being mindful of your environment. And here again, it may not be the intuitive idea that you may have when you think about this. There's actually, research showing that for some people, having a messy desk is better for them. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a clean desk. It's really, again, about being mindful. So really trying to pay attention to how your environment is affecting you. If you need a desk with a lot of things on it that gives you ideas, that sparks your creativity, and that's great, then do that. Actually, having an empty desk is going to negatively impact the way you work. But if you're someone who needs to have a clean desk, maybe spend a few minutes in the morning before starting to work to clean it up, get rid of any mugs that are there or anything like that, and make it clean. Same with noise. It's all about being mindful of it. Because, for example, personally, if it's too quiet, it just weirds me out and I can't really focus. And I'm not the only one. You have a lot of companies now that offer ways to have white noise or even fake sounds of coffee shops and those kind of things, so you can have them in your headphones, which shows that there is definitely a market for people who need a little bit of background noise to be able to focus. But equally, some people need quiet, and a bit of background noise is not necessarily the same as your children banging on the door, asking you to play with them when you're trying to finish an email. So again, just about being mindful. So something I recommend here is for 1 week to just take little notes at the end of every work session that you do. So when you're done working on maybe a brief or anything like that, just take a couple of minutes and write how it felt and a few notes about your environment. Where were you? Did you do that work from a coffee shop or from home or in an office? How were the noise levels? How was the temperature? Were there people around you, or were you on your own? Were you interrupted or not, etc.? And kind of rating the quality of your work and your state of flow. Were you really focused? Were you feeling really creative? Or on the other hand, were you feeling distracted? And after a while, you'll start noticing patterns. And this way you can design the perfect environment for you to be able to do your best work.
I just wanted to mention that ever since I learned about this research on how the presence of a smartphone can distract you, every time I need to focus on, some deep work, I put it away like in a different room, and that works much better for me. And about the environment, it's also interesting because we are now talking about creating different, zones at events that are better for people who are neurodivergent, for example, or who would like to, take some break, rest, or who are overwhelmed, sensory overwhelmed, just because it's, in many cases it's noisy, it's a lot of, lights, and it's crowded. And I think what you said about, different preferences of people, that's interesting, because we need to aim for creating this balance, that the event space is equally comfortable for different people, for those who prefer, having some noise, for example, or not having some noise, right? So it's about creating a balance in the event space.
Yeah, it's really about giving people options, really, because you are, by definition, when organizing events, this is not a one-to-one meeting. You are going to have a diversity of people with a diversity of needs, and sometimes people may not even know before being at the event what exactly feels right for them. So you can, of course, ask in forums before they come, just saying like, do you have any special needs, etc. But really having different options at the event is one of the best ways to ensure that they can have the best experience while they're there.
Absolutely. Now let's bust some myth here. And I'm talking about 10,000 hours rule. And it turns out that it's a myth, and I just really wanted to hear your perspective on this, and why practicing something for 10,000 hours does lead to expertise. Can you tell more about that?
Yes, there is something alluring about the idea that if you simply practice something for long enough, you are going to become an expert at it. That started with there was a study that was done with violinists, and what that study showed really was that people who tend to practice more overall tend to be better at their craft. And yes, absolutely. But there's nothing really surprising in this. And again, that's more of an average. So it doesn't necessarily mean that any given person, if they practice more, are going to become better. You are going to have people who will just stagnate after a while, other people who actually learn very fast and are going to become very good very quickly. It's just on average, if you look at enough people, more time means more expertise. Yes, sure. Great. What do you do with this? I'm not quite sure, because this is so obvious. And so the problem obviously is when you have the, articles and books written about the idea that this is a magic number, and that if you practice for that amount of time, you're going to be an expert. That is not true at all. There's been no study supporting that idea. So what the two key takeaways here would be that first, there is no magic number. So you can keep on practicing if you are passionate about something, or if there's a skill that is particularly helpful for you at work. By all means, do keep on practicing, do keep on learning, but just remove that idea of 10,000 hours from your mind, because it's meaningless. And the second one is thinking, instead of the quantity of hours, thinking about the quality of those training hours that you're putting in. And deliberate practice is a lot more helpful than just practicing. So instead of trying to aim for 10,000 hours, try to maybe have fewer hours, but be very deliberate about it, really practicing, really, again, like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, the generation effect. So you can read as much as you want about a topic, but really the best way to learn is for you to create your own version of it. So instead of just reading about music, maybe creating your own compositions, maybe instead of reading about event management, go and organize your own little event. You can even experiment outside of your day-to-day job. Organize a little cocktail party, or organize like a little panel discussion with people, like things outside of work where you can try different formats. You're going to learn a lot more from those experiences, this deliberate practice, than if you keep on just reading about them.
And I so much agree. My next question is about FOMO. And this is something highly relevant for events. And quite often, event organizers try to play around it and use it as a popular marketing technique. So don't miss out, is a motto, right? So what do you think about it? And can joy of missing out and marketing of the event coexist?
Oh, this is a really good question. At a personal level, fear of missing out and joy of missing out are the complete opposite, right? So
Yes.
when you practice JOMO, the joy of missing out, you decide to stay home. You decide to not go to the event. You decide to focus on self-care, on yourself, and you embrace this, and you know you're not going to be able to learn all of the things that you would have learned if you were there. You're not going to be able to connect with all of the people that you could have met if you weren't there, and you're happy with that decision. And that's JOMO. So how can you reconcile that with hosting events and wanting people to actually come? I've seen a few things I think that you can do to play with it. The first one is obviously you want people to come to your event, so you can play with JOMO within the event. Something that I've seen in some events, for example, which I think aligns pretty well with what we discussed earlier when you mentioned neurodiversity and how some people, for example, may experience sensory overload and may need a little break, is actually making the break space so cozy, so nice, and so fun to be in that even if you need to miss a session because you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and you need to go and take a break, you don't experience FOMO. And I think as an event organizer, that's a very difficult thing to achieve for an attendee to be able to skip a session, go and recharge, and experience JOMO as they do this. I think this is such a fascinating challenge, and I think it would definitely improve satisfaction rates for the event if someone feels like, okay, I need a break, I'm just going to miss that one session, but actually the break space was so comfortable that I was very glad that I could take this break for myself. And then another thing is for people who actually cannot make it, who would have wanted to come, and for some reasons, life happens and you couldn't come. I've seen a lot more event organizers offering replays now, which I think is amazing and a lot more accessible too. So for people who have a last minute thing, a parent, the kid gets sick or something happens, you're stuck at work, knowing that as part of your ticket to attend the event, you have access to a replay, and it can be a limited one. Sometimes, you just have access to it for a couple of weeks after the event, which is fine if for some sort of intellectual property reasons you can't have it indefinitely online. I think it's a great way to make it more inclusive, just saying, look, come at the event and it's going to be great, but also if really something happens, you don't have to experience FOMO because you're still going to be able to have some of that learning experience.
These are fascinating insights. I really love the idea about having breaks that would be so fascinating that people really like to spend time, during the break, at the break, rather than somewhere else. That's a fascinating idea and a fascinating challenge indeed. So thank you for this thought, and I guess a lot of listeners will find it really interesting and will try it out at some point. And I know that you are writing a book right now, Liminal Minds. Can you talk about it, and what is it going to be about?
So the book is going to be about our relationship to ambition, what it means to be ambitious in today's world, and it's going to contain a lot of the ideas that I already write about at Ness Labs around mindful productivity and creativity, meaningful work, mental health. Really, it's going to be a book about how to achieve your ambitions without sacrificing your mental health.
I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Do you have any deadlines or any dates where it's going to be out?
So if everything goes well, it should come out towards the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. It's a slow process, but a fascinating one. And I'm learning a lot. And I am taking my time to write it because, you mentioned that you had a newsletter. I've been writing online for years. And it has happened sometimes that I write an article and then I realize that maybe I made a little typo, so I can go and fix it. Or even sometimes I write an article about a research paper and then 6 months later it's debunked. Someone says, oh, there's a new study that came out, and so what you wrote about actually is not correct anymore. I can go and fix this. Whereas with a book, there's really this permanency to it that makes it so that I'm taking a lot more time. I'm rereading every sentence 1,000 times, making sure that it's exactly what I want to say. So it is slow, but it's very interesting. And I'm very much hoping that people who already enjoy reading Ness Labs will also enjoy reading some of those ideas in a different format.
Yeah, of course. I'm really looking forward to it. Well, I've got a couple of final questions for you. So first, what resources would you recommend for event professionals who, want to achieve more in events, be productive, but also are very much aware of their mental health and do not want to sacrifice their mental health?
Yes, well, obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ness Labs. So please do feel free to go and check the website. There's a newsletter and there's also a private community. Then I also have a friend called Johnny Miller who runs a course called Nervous System Mastery, which I think is amazing. And he's really helping people regulate their emotions by understanding the nervous system a little bit more. And another person's work that I'd like to recommend is Ali Abdal. He has a book coming out. When is it coming out? In a few months. I can't remember the exact date, which is called Feel Good Productivity. And so he's also going to talk a lot about those aspects of combining well-being with productivity. And he's a former doctor and online creator. So he also has, one foot in both worlds, which I think is fascinating.
Thank you so much. We will have all those resources mentioned in the show notes with the links for those watching. And my last question is, because the podcast title is What If I Told You? I always ask my guests to complete the sentence with one takeaway relevant for our conversation. So what if I told you?
What if I told you that taking care of your mental health can actually make you more productive?
Perfect. That's a perfect line. Thank you so much. Anne-Laure, thank you so much for joining me today. That was a great conversation, and I invite everyone to connect with Anne-Laure and to sign up for her newsletter and community and learn from her insights. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Event Psychology podcast. For more brain science insights and for this episode recap, I invite you to join the Event Psychology Club. Also, if you want to upgrade your skills and get research-backed solutions for your events, I invite you to take the Event Psychology Lab online course that I created for event pros like you. Until next time, bye-bye.